Welcome, everybody, to this SCLA Fund Seminar. So for those who don't know me, I'm Shelley Balderson, so I'm the Networks Manager for the Masters in Conservation Leadership. And at this point, I have the pleasure of curating the alumni network and helping you all grow. For those who don't know, the Sansom Conservation Leadership Fund, also known as the SCLA Fund, was established with thanks to the generosity of Robert and Edie Sansom to support high impact conservation projects undertaken by our alumni. So this is an end of project seminar, which marks the 7th project to reach completion. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the fund itself due to time, but I will drop the web link in the chat after I've finished speaking to enable you to find out more and see the other projects that we support. We are on the cusp of announcing the successful projects for the 5th round of the fund, so watch this space. So I'm going to stop speaking now and I'm going to hand over to Radhika and Swapnil from GroundUp Asia, and they're going to tell you about their project, Grassroots Pathway to Biodiversity Recovery. Over to you guys.
Thanks a lot, Shelley. And it is so great to see so many familiar faces, but also quite a lot of new faces. It's great, and we are deeply honored that you took such a valuable time from your busy schedule to be present here to listen to what we have to share based on our experiences. Myself, Swapnil, I'm a founder and CEO of GroundUp Asia Private Limited. We go by the 4th name as GroundUp Conservation. What GroundUp does is very simple. We translate the science and knowledge of ecological restoration at landscape scale by integrating traditional knowledge of communities and give it into the hands back into the community so that it is like up to the mark with like latest kind of like trajectories or narratives. And it is like quite a lot of co-creation that we do. We offer 3 business vertical, which are like, providing the services to separate segments of the market. First is grassroots development, in which it is the organizational building, getting them funding ready. Second is developing and implementing landscape management plans. And third one, to make them financially independent, the grassroots organization, so that their core teams' salaries are like, taken care. We develop for-profit spin-off for the grassroots organization who are non-profit. And those could be service-based or the product-based, either the trade of medicine aromatic plants, compost, trading of fishes, etc., or it could be service-based, such as an ecotourism. Coming to the grassroots pathway to biodiversity recovery, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to give a importance and like a genesis as to why we started asking these questions. Over the period of over the past like 5-6 years, IPLC's inclusion into conservation sphere has started to gain quite a lot of traction. It is now cemented into the literature that like when local resident, be it indigenous people or local communities, when they are part and parcel of decision making around conservation, land rights, or resource mobilization and resource allocation, chances and probability of success of conservation measures is quite high as compared to the traditional ways of making decisions. It also gives rise to an important question that where are the lands and ocean available to put them under the traditional protect area measures, right? Majority of the lands are now like in under the private or institutional ownership. So that land is not yet been really like treated for understanding that there are also each land mass is a function unit of one or the other ecosystem. So restoration can be taken up there. It opens up quite a huge mass opportunity. IPLCs in different geographies, especially in our region, South Asia, they organize themselves in several different kinds of groups. So there could be volunteer groups, there could be like village councils, there could be like, Praja Mandals or like traditional such group mechanisms. For the purpose of this work, we call collectively them as grassroots. Anybody who is in live experience and live proximity with the landscape where they are based, where there is a conservation potential, we are considering them as the grassroots. Even the global conservation discourse gives emphasis on IPLCs. Funding and technical skills are yet to reach to the ground. At least is the case with South Asia, where we are operating currently. And in such scenario, while there are like several groups working in Latin America, East Africa, or like Southeast Asia, we saw that there was a paucity of knowledge in terms of the challenges that these grassroots organizations are facing. If we are sure that like a community are the answer, then what are the questions, right? And these were some of the questions that were like troubling us. Then we wanted to dig deeper into that part. And to do that part, GPBR was actually launched, Grassroots Pathway to Biodiversity Recovery, as an inquiry into conservation discourse for South Asia, targeted in the countries of Nepal, Bhutan, India, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. And during that phase, like Radhika, my colleague and co-founder of GroundUp, will be putting this entire work into sharing, like, what is it that we actually discover. I also wish to bring to your attention that this work is not complete in any form, in a sense. It's a programmatic vision, which is what, like, the questions are so many. It will take time for it to bring to its most complete form. But what we are presenting today is just the phase one, which was a year and a half long. And this is what we are now presenting to you. If you have any question, please like drop them into the chat box. And now I request Radhika to please like take it over and like share the work on GPBR.
Thanks, Swapnil. That pretty much sets the ground. I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, is it visible?
Not the full screen.
Oh, okay, that should
Okay, yeah, now it is.
All right, great. Thank you so much. As Swapnil has mentioned, I think for us, this inquiry of why grassroots, what is the potential of grassroots organizations, somewhere started a few years ago. But essentially, when we were writing this project, the first questions that came to our mind was that, while we invest so heavily into biodiversity conservation, why are the grassroots organizations who are actually closest to the problem and to the people are least supported and least understood? That's how this entire thing of, what are the realities of grassroots organizations? What is it that they really require, and what are the kind of solutions that we can really bring to them? That's how this entire study started, at least. Swapnil has already mentioned, there is very limited information from this part of the world, basically on what are the challenges and the priorities of grassroots organizations. We do know that a lot of funding decisions are made on assumptions, on templates, and not really lived realities of most of these grassroots organizations. And therefore, this almost like a bias and a tension between what the funders really want and what the organizations or the real custodians of the land really want. So with that, we kind of, we also realize that it's not just the funders and the grassroots organizations, but it's the entire system that needs proper understanding. And somewhere we need to see all these different parameters as well. So we started out asking very simple questions that, first, let's fill in the knowledge, at least from this part of the world, because it is culturally, socio-politically, even in terms of the geopolitics, so different from the rest of Asia and, of course, the rest of the global South. Our main focus was, of course, to fill this knowledge gap, where we were essentially trying to directly engage with grassroots organizations and local bodies and understand what are the constraints, what are the realities that they work in. And then was to not just provide insights from what's really happening, but also ensure that we are able to actually give out some practical recommendations on what can be done and what are those shifts that can be made. And for us, of course, the scale and the depth was extremely important, ensuring that we were working in these 5 countries. We didn't want to just, overemphasize from the country that we come in. Because even if we talk about Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, again, culturally and geopolitically very, very different. And that's the kind of, insights we needed from this entire region. So we worked across 5 countries, as Swapnil has already mentioned. We broke this into 3 main categories. One was that we put out an online survey, which was essentially, trying to match up on what are those realities of grassroots organizations. We sent it out to as many organizations as possible, and we received over 80 organizations who had filled the survey from all the 5 countries. Then in the next phase, we also had a conversation with grassroots representatives, about 25 organizations. These were all online one-on-one conversations adhering to different set of questions that were developed throughout this entire study. Again, focusing on what's working, what's not working, what is it that we can do, and what are really the realities of the geopolitical scenarios that most of these organizations work in. While we were talking to grassroots organizations, we realized that our understanding of the country and our understanding of conservation in that country was not really rounded. So we also started speaking to a lot of subject matter experts who have been working in conservation and specifically in those countries, for us to also create that context when we receive the information from the grassroots organizations. While we had almost finished our conversations with the grassroots organizations, we realized that we ourselves were getting into a very biased perspective of what the grassroots were thinking and how they wanted to communicate themselves to the world outside. And we realized that we needed the perspective of the funding agencies as well. And that's when, while this was beyond the project scope, we decided that, okay, we definitely need to get the funding aspect or the funding perspective also into place to really round this entire, this complex problem that is there, and not just the complexity, but the variability of all these different factors. And once we understood from all these different, perspectives, then we were able to actually see that, okay, the problem is not just large, but there are so many nitty-gritties to the larger context itself. And of course, we followed this by the three country field visits. We were, of course, here in India, in Bhutan, and in Nepal. We actually visited some of the grassroots organizations that we had been communicating with throughout this entire first phase. But before we dive into what we found, at the very first step itself, we had to really define whom we are going to call grassroots organizations, that Swapnil has already mentioned. This is in the sector, it's a very vague term. It encompasses a lot of organizations, community-based organizations, rural enterprises, local associations, local bodies. Some of them are just voluntary, some of them are not necessarily registered. But for us, the main criteria was that they had to be led or compromised of IPLC members. Of course, they were addressing local challenges, and they had some sort of an intergenerational connect with that particular landscape or the communities that they were working with. And most of the organizations should be using at least some sort of a local bottom up decision making process for the work that they were doing into the landscape. And also what we realized, in terms of just keeping the contours of the larger project in process, we decided to go only with registered organizations. Like I said, if we would have not put in that criteria, the canvas was too large for us to fit into the scope of this project. So essentially, this is how, while we talked about grassroots organization, our own experience, the understanding of what we were gathering, it was not really defined by, who an organization is and what the organization was by the legal status of how the organization was presented. But the very definition of grassroots identity was challenged all the time, every time we spoke to a different organizations. So in terms of, I'm going to just list out the overarching key findings that we have, and then of course we'll put out the link to the report as well. But in terms of the key findings itself, we categorize them into three main sectors, if I can call. One was, of course, the implementation challenges. The fundraising challenges, which was somewhere triggered by the power dynamics also in the sector. And then, of course, the organizational challenges. I'll start with each one of them. Essentially, when we spoke about the implementation challenges, were, the lack of, sometimes basic lack of infrastructure within the organizations. The digitalization of most of the records is not there. Even a physical space sometimes is compromised due to various factors. There are tools, equipments which are lot of organizations were struggling with, and there were issues in terms of permits and insufficient funds for in terms of the public funds, in terms of most of the organizations. Almost 1/3 of the organizations had inadequate transportation infrastructure. While they would probably be in a city or a small town where they would have certain connectivity, most of their sites were remote, and therefore that transportation hassle was always a big challenge for most of these organizations. A lot of funds were used just in the transportation bit, and therefore they were not able to really understand the value or the breakdown of how these funds could actually function in terms of the real work of the community itself. A lot of organizations we spoke to had issues with digital connectivity. We struggled with a lot of organizations, and just getting in touch with them. Internet is always a hassle in most of the organizations, or the organizations or the areas that we spoke to. A lot of organizations were also constantly, struggling with the inconsistent support from the local political groups or the political system within the country itself. So in Myanmar, to give that example, is that because of the political upheaval and the struggle there, a lot of organizations were not able to move to certain remote areas without having permission from the military itself. And we were not allowed to speak to certain organizations, and certain organizations were not allowed to even share the names or the places that they were working with because of the larger political context. In terms of the implementation challenges, what we realized are these were real challenges on the ground itself. And we realized that because of this, a lot of their efforts would always get a bit lopsided. While they would want to implement projects on the ground, this entire functioning, the external functionality, the external functions were just not in support of them, for them to be able to obviously carry out the work with the best of their ability. Second was, of course, the fundraising challenges. Of course, just about every organization did not have a team to write fundraising proposals. Most of them were always having difficulty in terms of understanding the proposal language, in terms of just understanding what is required in the proposal, and also in terms of a complete mismatch between what the donors required and what the conservation realities were. When we spoke to a couple of organizations, they did mention that a lot of times they would tweak some of their proposals just to ensure that they would get the funds in, while they were not really true to the priorities that they required on the ground. Rigid reporting structures from that were enforced by the funding organizations was also another very important criteria, and most of the teams struggled with this. It was not just the language barrier, in terms of most of the proposals and the reporting is always done in English, while they've been using Google Translate and now recently ChatGPT, but they were somehow not being able to communicate the actual insights that they would receive from the ground in anything but their local language. Of course, a lot of organizations said that they've been competing with some of the biggest organizations when it comes to the national funding calls and the international funding calls. Some organization in Nepal mentioned that while there are international proposal calls, we end up competing with someone like an IUC and or a UNDP, which is completely unfair in terms of who is going to really receive the money. We also realized that the fundraising challenges were completely triggered by the power dynamics within the conservation ecosystem itself. While it was not completely out there, but what we've been understanding is that there's a concentration of where the fund really flows. There are the larger organizations, there are the intermediaries as well, who receive most of the funding, and a lot of these grassroots organizations end up being implementers and not really decision makers or innovators in this entire process. And of course, national policies influence a lot of how this funds and grants move. In India itself, with the changes in the FCRA fund, which is the permit required to receive the foreign aid, has completely changed over the last few years, and it has affected a lot of grassroots organizations. While they would receive money from other larger national organizations who would have such permits, but they would not really receive, at least 80% of the grant that they would require was only more for logistics in terms of support, but not necessarily for the work that they were actually doing with on the ground for the communities that they were working with. In terms of the third main criteria, which is the organizational development challenges, this again, the fundraising actually has a direct impact on how the organization develops and builds itself. Most of them were not able to retain a team. Most of them did not even have communication teams, or were not able to bring out those compelling stories or impact stories despite the work that they were doing. Training and technology is a real problem for them as well. And we also saw with a lot of these grassroots organizations that they were mostly founder led. Founder was pretty much the hub who would end up doing a lot of administrative work, as well as the fundraising work, as well as the communication work. Once the founder would transition out, there was practically no second layer of leadership within the organizations. And these were such real challenges that it really affected the entire functionality of the grassroots organizations as well. And we also realized that, while these challenges and everything was so real, this was also creating a lot of bias, therefore the bias of operationality for the funding agencies. A lot of funders are not able to actually entrust the organizations, the grassroots organizations, because of so many of these criterias, and financial management becomes a real issue for them as well. This entire thing of, while we were understanding the challenges, the lived realities of so many of these organizations, we realized that a lot of them also knew where the solutions were, how they wanted to change and what they wanted to change in the system. But a lot of these things are never really heard before, or even they are mentioned out there, but no one really has a blueprint on how to work with grassroots organizations. And the similar thing we were seeing for the funding agencies as well, that a lot of them want to support direct community-based organizations or direct grassroots organizations, but somehow the bias of trust, there is bias, of course, there is trust issues as well, and also this lack of understanding of, look, how are they going to be able to pull off this entire project, which could which could sometimes run into millions of dollars. And therefore the recommendations that we came up with, we decided to actually call them the shifts. We understood that, there are fundamental shifts required within the conservation circle itself, within the conservation sector. Unless all these different system actors don't play an equal role, those shifts are not going to happen. And these were not just, small incremental tweaks, but these are like, how the resources, how the money is moving, how it's been designed, delivered, and decided needed to change. And that's how we came up with this whole thing of, we are recommending the 4 shifts. I will walk through them one by one. But essentially, looking at, like I said, trust is a major factor in the conservation sector. And we realized this needs to change from just contractual based relationships to really a trust-based relationship, and expanding the scope of, how we are collecting data, and also expanding the scope and the scale of how do we really want to measure impact with grassroots organizations that we work with. The third one is primarily on how does the democracy or the autonomy of grassroots organizations work. How are we asking them to report, and what is it that they need in terms of power sharing and having funds enough to actually implement and innovate at the ground level itself. And then, of course, the larger section of the decision making institutes and the conservation leaderships itself. What we also did was that within every shift, we came up with recommendations for each of the system players. So within the first shift itself, we realized that the onus is not just on the funding agencies. The grassroots organizations also need to inspire confidence to the funders that they would be able to manage. They would be able to actually ensure that there is financial management of all these different aspects that a funder requires, because they themselves are bounded by certain legality and the rules as well. And of course, if they are able to articulate their priorities better and not just write proposals because there is a funding call out there. In terms of the funders, of course, a lot of simplification, if not an oversimplification of how the proposal writing or the grant making process actually works. There are reporting mechanisms, and there is a real need to prioritize certain long-term governance change within the funding cycles itself. And of course, a lot of these relationships can only be built through dialogue. Today, in the conservation circle itself, or in the sector itself, there are cold calls out there, and no one really knows who's applying. But if we are able to change that and say that there will be a dialogue with an organization, there is understanding of what exactly the organization requires, then we will be moving from just a contract-based relationship to a trust-based relationship. Of course, when it comes to the system actors itself, like I said, the government and also a lot of other institutes and partners play a very significant role in ensuring that the compliances are not duplicated or simplified, or if there is some sort of a role of other parties also to bridge this gap between the grassroots organizations and the system actors. This entire thing of the donor language and the local realities needs to be unbundled. In the second shift, what we realize is that, of course, conservation has always worked in a certain way. It is obviously always data driven, and there is science part of it is, of course, always required. But a lot of the heavy science is something that some of the organizations are not able to carry. Therefore, the inclusion of local knowledge, oral histories, lived experiences somehow needs to meet into the common ground of the scientific rigor as well. Of course, a lot of work has already been done in this sphere, but somehow this is still not translated when it comes to the grassroots levels as well. For grassroots organizations, of course, evidence building is extremely important. A lot of these organizations that we spoke to had worked in landscapes for more than 10 years, 15 years. And yet they did not have evidence or that kind of documentation to support that these are the changes that has happened. Therefore, not just simplifying this entire, evidence-based mechanisms for grassroots organization, but for them also to understand that this works two ways. It is a participatory process, and it needs to function in a way that is fully reflection of their learning and experiences within the landscape itself. And to funders, of course, trying to redefine what exactly impact means, to include the intangibles like the local governance or just the participatory power of the local communities itself, and not being really rigid about how reporting works. In terms of the system actors, I think a lot of things is already happening where we are enabling open data systems that merge scientific and community data sets, and also some sort of a joint validation between the hardcore science of conservation and the local actors as well. And of course, it goes without saying the recognition of indigenous knowledge systems. While it is valued, how we use and to actually recognize it as science, we are still a bit far especially when it comes to this part of the world. In the essence of this shift, it was more like, data is not just a proof, but knowledge, it needs to become like a knowledge for partnership if grassroots organizations are to be at the hub of this entire dialogue as well. In terms of the third shift, a lot of current systems are trying to work only on scale and outputs. But we've realized that grassroots organizations may not necessarily have that kind of scale and outputs that we keep talking about, the number game, especially, when it comes to India, we have a lot of CSR that focus only on the number game. But some of the grassroots organizations are somehow not going to be able to do that. But we need to rather focus on the sustainability and the localization of all these efforts. Specifically for grassroots organizations, the focus also needs to be on the institutional health, because that's where we will be able to build trust for the funders. And also, the over dependence on grants also need to change. Grassroots organizations need to learn to diversify income streams and formalize leadership structures, second leadership structures as well. And when it comes to funders, of course, we need far more patient grants than we have been at the moment. Of course, there is grants available which focus on organizational development, but they are not as much as compared to funds available for to actually do the conservation work. But if we are to ensure that grassroots organizations who are at the very source of the problem, if we want to equip them properly, we need to also have some patient grants in place. In terms of the fourth shift, again, like I said in the beginning itself, the power dynamics, there is a power dynamics in conservation, and that's never necessarily spoke about. But that is something that is changing from the top itself, where funders are wanting to support directly to grassroots organizations, but somehow the blueprint is missing. Somehow we've not been able to figure out how this is going to work. I think this is a open dialogue out there itself for ensuring that grassroots voices are heard, and heard not just in a way that we are documenting them, but actually ensuring and creating samples that this can actually work. For grassroots organizations, of course, beyond them working as just a one single entity, for them to nurture leadership at the community level is also extremely important. And we need to create certain mechanisms where funding is actually given to the local entities itself, and not just the organizations who are bringing or grassroots organizations on board. And of course, in terms of the system actor, again, like I said, there is an entire governance redesign that needs to happen, and institutionalized community participation. We are still a long way for that when it especially comes to this part of the world. But there are glimpses of hope. There are a lot of forestry groups in Nepal who have certain rights to actually take care of certain landscapes, though they may not be necessarily having that kind of legal power. But some of these shifts are already happening especially in Nepal. We saw a lot of good studies, and even in Bhutan. In India, this is still, I would say, this is still something that is still open to, and it's kind of finding its way into the entire process itself. In terms of the larger recommendations, of course, while we were working with all these organizations, we realized that every grassroots was at a very different stage. There were grassroots organizations who were probably just 2-3 years old, and they were still finding their footing. And then there were grassroots organization in India who was more than 30 years old and still was not able to raise that kind of funds that they would have wanted, having a 30-year institutional history. And it's the same organization, a 3-year-old and a 30-year-old, applying for the same grants that are out there. What we realize is that there is a readiness required, and that's how we are proposing this entire framework called the Grassroots Organization Lifecycle Framework. The Grassroots Organization Lifecycle Framework is essentially more of a reflective tool to see, where organizations stand, who they are, and what are their readiness in terms of accepting all those funds as well. But when we designed this entire tool, we also realized that it is something that can work for the funding agencies and other system partners as well. Uh, Essentially, like I said, the understanding of grassroots organizations is very vague, and it's like an umbrella word used to describe certain organizations who work directly with people on the ground. But for funding agencies also to set realistic expectations of who the organization is, what is it that they can do at a certain stage of their development, is as important. The grassroots we call the GOL framework. We're calling it as the GOL framework. It's more of a milestone-based cycle than a unidirectional, time-based. It's not a ranking tool, but it's more like a reflective tool to understand where the organization is, in which part of their developmental stage they are in. I'll just quickly show you the tool as well. I'm just going to change my screen. Yeah. Is the Excel, can you see the Excel file? Okay. It's visible, right? Okay.
Yeah, it is visible. Radhika, maybe you want to zoom in a little bit?
Yes. Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially, this entire tool was developed as, like I said, self-reflective, more like a, self-explanatory exercise, which organizations and representatives of grassroots organizations or funding organizations can do. While we have this entire tool, what we had actually done is categorize this tool into two main areas. One is area of operational growth, which is essentially the relationship with the community, organization structure, access to funding and resources, team, scale, and sustainability. And the other part of being the stages of development as to where you are in this entire stage of development. The stage one being learning about the system. This means which you are a small organization, relatively new organization trying to understand, what is the niche, what is it that you want to do as an organization, what are the expectations of the community and all of that, and also in terms of the legal and the fiduciary compliances. Stage two is where you would have certain level of experience as an organization, and you have realistic understanding of what the community wants to do, what the community needs, and a realistic understanding of how much funding is required. Stage three is similar, a little more mature organization where you understand the teams, where you have a potent team in place to carry out the work. You have an understanding of what the legal and the fiduciary requirements are, and of course, the larger community and the ecological aspects as well. And the last one, stage four, is in terms of shaping the system, where you're already a mature organization, where you already have teams and second layer of leadership in place, and the rest of it as well. So what you will see in this entire tool, we have kept this tool, we'll share the link after this. There are steps written on how one can actually use this entire framework. And then general FAQs mentioning, if there are any other questions that you would have, we'd be happy to answer them as well. I'm just going to quickly run through this, and then we can take some more questions later. So essentially here you will see is the indicators of growth. This is where, an organization can come and they can choose which stage they are in, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then similarly with the organization structure, there are different categories that have kept, and each organization needs to actually self-reflect and understand which is the stage that they really belong to. So these are the different categories. I'm just going to quickly select randomly out here. And then in terms of the funding, I won't go to team and scale for now. Essentially, what happens is that this kind of summarizes where the organization is in terms of the areas of growth and the stages of growth as well. And essentially, this is where, this entire stage comes in. And then we have like a chart here, which once all the numbers are put in, the charts also come here. I won't go into the detail of this, but just to quickly share is that, this is something that we've been working on in GroundUp for a very long time. And we've essentially understood that, every organization requires some sort of a self-reflective tool to understand where they are and understand the larger funding systems as well. And therefore, I mean, if I can probably say, Swapnil can extend later, is that we're trying to keep this is completely open access. It's available on our website as well. And if any organization or if any institute would like to carry on this activity, we are happy to get on call and show you how this entire tool works and how best you can actually implement this at the organizational level. And we're happy to facilitate this entire process as well. Coming back to the presentation itself. So yeah, this entire project, where we started and where we reached, we realized that there was so much to do with grassroots organizations. There is a real need to understand them, and they really require support. It is as simple as, we are trying to have like a team. We need to train our second leadership layer, or we need some support on how to write a proposal, So what we did is that, since we had time and we had been really speaking to a lot of grassroots organizations on one-on-one basis, we did a 2-day proposal writing workshops for all the organizations that we had worked with throughout this entire process. And we also introduced them to the GOL framework. We're very happy to share that, some of these organizations had actually downloaded the tool and they were actually trying to work on it as well, though we did not hear from them after that. It can be a bit daunting. Something as simple as a tool is also daunting work for them, and they really don't have the time for all of this. In terms of our outreach, we also Swapnil and my colleague Purva Shah had also gone to EC mode in Nepal, just trying to put the word out there as to why grassroots organizations are important and what is it that we can really do with them, the potential that they have, and the readiness of them to really be able to, work in this entire sector in terms of the recovery of biodiversity itself. And what we also realize is that, of course, for us, we're treating this as phase one. The work doesn't end here. Biodiversity recovery is a very long process, but we are just treating this as phase one because there is still so much work to be done, which well beyond, it all kind of was going beyond the scope of how we started, where we started. And we realized that, for this project, we limit ourselves to what our definition was and the way the entire project had evolved. But we already started to work on the second phase of this project, where we are looking at, how policies can actually nurture and support grassroots organizations as well. And then there are, of course, other phases that would happily come. Of course, we have just recently launched this entire report. All insights, findings, everything is out there. Swapnil can probably just put it in chat, the link to our report, or you can just simply scan this QR. We also realize is that, while we were writing the report, that it wouldn't do justice for us if we were to keep the report only in English. So we went ahead and we have the report translated in Hindi, Nepali, Sinhala, and Burmese as well. Essentially the countries that we worked with and the people that we worked with. And of course, this entire challenge of a language barrier had to be resolved by, had to be, of course, touched on by us also. That is why the translations and everything was there. I think if I were to just kind of close here, I think our entire motto or the goal of the project has been that, if we say that biodiversity recovery is the essential goal that we need to work on, then strengthening grassroots is not just, it's just not optional. It is the very foundation on which we need to build this entire recovery pathway. So yeah, I think in the end, of course, Swapnil has already mentioned, we'll be more than happy to connect with everyone to walk through the GOL tool and walk through any part of the report, or anything that you wish to know about GroundUp Conservation, or just generally about the work, about how do we best work with grassroots and how do we optimize work with grassroots. Please feel free to get in touch with us. I probably should have done this in the beginning, but I didn't. But a big thank you to Shelly, Chris, Mr. Sanson for all this support that we've received. I must admit that, this is something that GroundUp had been sitting on for so long. And this pretty much formalized all our thinking. It also kind of brought together a document that, between Swapnil and me, it had been bits of notes in a bit of in our head and all over the place. But this has really helped us to step back and really not just bring together, but also formalize this. Okay, this is everything that we've been thinking about, and this is everything now that's out there. Now is the next step to actually execute a lot of this. And of course, Swapnil and team are leading a lot of this work as well. Again, I'd just like to thank, of course, the entire Cambridge network for all the support. We reached out to a lot of alumni, especially in terms of subject matter experts. A big thank you to them. All of their names have been listed here. A big thank you again to Chris and Shelly for not being typical funders, for giving us the breathing space and being super flexible about this entire project as well. And of course, Mr. Sansom for the support this network requires. I myself had the scholarship, the Robert Sanson scholarship. And I was just telling Shelley, it's been more than a decade, and I'm so happy to be here. And this kind of closes the circle for me. And I'm so happy to also see a couple of, familiar names. I don't see them on camera, but so happy to be here. Thank you so much. Swapnil, over to you if you need to add anything.
No, I think like you have covered most of the part. I just wanted to also happily share and acknowledge the support of our alumni group. Quite a lot of our own alumni actually helped us to connect with the grassroots in respective countries. But also at the same time, like you see, it's quite challenging to translate the words such as ecosystem, biodiversity, grassroots into local languages. And our alumni actually help us to translate them. What is a near linguistic equivalent of those kind of words. So that had been extremely helpful and a very significant contribution that I think our alumni network did. And they came forward to support. So without that help, also, the report wouldn't have been possible to be translated into so many languages. So really grateful for our entire alumni network also. We can open the session for question answer. Radhika, meanwhile, if you could just kindly go through the chat box. There are also some specific questions that our colleagues have asked. Maybe just have a look at it. I'll read it out for you. What specific concerns or fears do donors express about working with new unknown grassroots partners? Is it primarily about financial accountability? Albina asked this question, and there is also another follow-up question to that. What are the practical barriers funders cite for not giving directly to the grassroots? Is it fiduciary risk, administrative capacity, or so on and so forth?
So I think it was pretty much the finance is the very first aspect. I think there is a lot of trust on the knowledge that the grassroots organizations have. But in terms of the management, in terms of the project management and the financial management, that's where, the trust is not fully there. We also saw, a lot of a lot of funding agencies, I wouldn't like to name them, but a lot of their ads had not even reached. They said that they wanted to work for grassroots organization and support grassroots organizations, but a lot of the postings were not really available in the grassroots networks itself. That itself showed that how big this entire gap is. And for some of the organizations, some of the funding agencies, they didn't mind giving the money, but they wanted a third party, a bigger organization, a bigger national organization involved, so that someone was there to take the blame or share the risks of working with the grassroots organizations. So there were varied number of things that were cited by funding agencies, but when it actually came down to the practicality, it was always about the funding management and the project management itself. Have I answered
Yeah.
all aspects?
There are also a few questions, but Chris has raised his hand. Maybe we can take his question and then come back to the questions in the chat box.
Thanks, Swapnil and Radhika. Yeah, not so much a question, but partly just to say congratulations on a brilliant project and presentation. I really, really enjoyed it. It's very, very relevant and kind of resonates very well with a lot of other projects I'm aware of and involved in. I just wanted to pop into the chat, which I'm just doing now, the strategic plan for Maliasili, which they've just recently published. And it's actually a fascinating document in terms of some of the analysis that it includes about the role of locally led organizations, some of the challenges facing locally led organizations and the work that they're doing to address it. And I'm sure you're already aware of them and in contact with them, but it just seems so much similarity in what I was hearing from you. So I thought I'd just share that with everyone. Yeah, it's relatively long for a strategic plan, but it's got lots of really interesting analysis about the kind of sector and where it's going, which I think is worth having a look at.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Thanks, Chris, for sharing. We have read their work and we also had interviewed them, one of their colleagues from Maliasili. We'll definitely have a look at this strategic plan also. They are quite advanced in terms of like how institutionally they've been supporting grassroots in Africa. And we are identifying that kind of a structural support to locally led organization is just simply lacking here in part of India, Nepal, Bhutan. And that's why also we just simply see that conservation measures are being again and again retaken in the same geographies. While there are 1,000 national parks, hardly 100 comes on the top list of any research or any practices. So what happens to that 900, right? And there are already individual groups or associations who are there, who are part and parcel of the conservation there, but they really nobody has really reached out to them. And biodiversity is at complete mercy of time. And that was also the thing where we felt this gap needs to get filled for South Asia as a context. And we do take quite a lot of inspiration from Alias's work. Yeah, Noor has raised. Noor,
Yeah.
do you want to go? Ask your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to confirm that you can hear me clearly. Great.
Yes.
Firstly, thank you to the both of you for this excellent work. It was very insightful and brilliant results, brilliant insights. I have a few questions. I'm just going to say them in a row. I hope that's okay, and in case they're helpful. So just to clarify, when talking about grassroots organizations in this case, are we talking exclusively about conservation-focused grassroots organizations, or any organizations that work at the intersection of biocultural heritage rights? Okay, great. I can tell it's a wider scope, not just exclusive
Yes.
conservation. Thank you.
Yeah.
The second question, and I had flagged it in the chat, but I was wondering whether the term trust-based philanthropy or the trust-based grant making and things like the website of trustbasedphilanthropy.org, which focuses on strengthening the capacity of funding organizations to incorporate those. Has that featured in your work? Sorry if I missed it. Great.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah.
In fact, we did go through the website, and we've actually seen a lot of these terms like patient grant, and a lot these are things are just kind of coming up. They're very new in terms of vocabulary. We did look at all of these websites as well, and we have kind of wherever we've taken information, they've already been kind of acknowledged within the report itself. And in fact, I'm just seeing your comment as well. We did speak to Synchronicity Earth and then the fund that they have, which is extremely innovative. And we've actually cited that example of how innovative this fund is and how this can actually be replicated at some other funds as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And if I can ask one final follow-up question, it also links a little bit to Aylin's point on CBD. So the Convention on Biological Diversity explicitly notes the role of indigenous peoples, local communities, and their knowledge systems in any and all efforts pertaining to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. I was wondering on one front whether that sort of framing is helpful for the grassroots organizations when applying for funding to justify the inclusion of diverse knowledge systems in research and decision making. And on the second front, I was wondering whether you came across methodologies that help to weave in indigenous and local knowledge alongside other knowledge systems, like the multiple evidence-based approach, which is what IBES is using to weave in these diverse knowledge systems, and whether those methodologies can be helpful on the ground for those organizations. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Noor. So I'll first answer your second question. That no, we do not look into the methodologies, but of course that was not the scope of the project. But that's something that we are doing at GroundUp in terms of the other work that GroundUp does. In terms of the first question, which was, I'm sorry, I forgot. The first part of the question was?
Interlinkages with multilateral environmental agreements like the CBD,
Oh, right.
and specifically referencing the role of indigenous peoples, local communities, and their knowledge systems.
Right. Right. Thank you. So yes, we did mention this to a lot of grassroots organizations, and they do obviously say that, this very much is within the contours of so many of these bilateral treaties and all of that. But like I said, the competition is so high and it's so difficult that they just don't get seen in this entire sea. It's almost impossible for them to compete with an organization would have who would have proposal writing teams. They just don't have the skills in terms of not just the language, but in terms of articulating those ideas as brilliantly, or I think, I don't know, simply as the work that they do on the ground. It's just they've just not been able to, break that ceiling.
I also wanted to just add to the previous question that Radhika already answered in terms of trust-based philanthropy. What we also observe, like, localized organization, grassroots organization, they are like literally so disconnected from the global discourses. Even these terminologies, like what exactly is a trust-based philanthropy? If you want them to ask and like unbundle that thing in front of them, they will be lost. And there are so many new nomenclatures that are getting thrown on like social medias and all. Very often the first response from the grassroots sector is like, we don't want to really get into that part. Is there anybody who can just like speak to us, understand our issues and support us? It gets to as simple as that part. And while we ask them like, okay, so what kind of support do you really need? And to do so, we just went through that entire GOL framework, which is kind of like, self-reflecting tool. If you do that thing with your team or your founding members or your community and all, you try to see like, within the team of grassroots organization also, there is so much divergence in the idea and opinion or the vision of the organization. How do you consolidate that so that you have a united voice while you are going to the donors, that you ask for the programmatic funding, but you also ask for the organizational funding? And that organizational funding, where do you plug that thing, is exactly what the GOL is actually trying to help. So it is like, if they have gone through that entire process together, they might see that volunteer wise, they have like strong base of 3,000 people. But when it comes to like, hands-on experience on restoration, they do not have it, right? So they might be at stage 4, extremely advanced level compared to many other organizations, but like stage 1 at like some other parameters. So how do you exactly bring them to like, level playing field? And this tool actually gives the donors also a platform to allow them to kind of like see what are the different needs of the grassroots organization. It might not be just like, that trust-based philanthropy translating into like 1 or 2 or 4 objectives that like the donors of philanthropic organization actually support. Need not necessarily be the case. They might want to undertake this exercise and see that A organization requires this support, B organization perhaps requires something else completely, and that is the kind of gap that we wanted to try to fill, so that like grassroots themselves also a little better negotiation power while they are interacting with the donors. And how do we exactly like provide that power on for the negotiation when they sit on the table? And that was something that we thought like would be worthwhile and valuable for the grassroots organization, that it comes from a reflective process and not just because they have heard something. And that also provides them a absolute structure clarity as to what are the weak points in the organization where organizations can actually fail. Obviously, the external consequences to that, like, in a landscape, grassroots organization failing means that complete vacuum that gets created. Institutional memories, connections, network, knowledge of the species, what had happened, everything gets lost. And like to fulfill that gap is also quite a lengthy and very resource intensive process. So that was the thing as to like why grassroots actors, they need to also understand where they are vulnerable while they are doing the marvelous work on the ground.
Sunetra, maybe we can just take the last question. Suneha, sorry.
Hi, yeah, Suneha. Thank you so much for this amazing present. Can you hear me? Am I audible to everybody? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Thanks so much for this excellent presentation, Swapnil and Radhika, and just the scope of your work is amazing, and I think really lacking so far in South Asia. But it's also, I'm wondering, like the past 5 years have been like a time of like increased geopolitical tensions, like governments being taken down, taken over, so on and so forth in South Asia. Has that come up, and like have the impacts of that been actively, obviously, I'm sure they've been felt in the sector, and I'm just wondering how it's come up within your research and how you like those sort of like large scale systemic changes, how do these small local actors then sort of respond to that? I would just love your sort of insights to that.
Yeah, it came up all the time. Like, when we talk about South Asia, Bangladesh is very much a part of that. And we had to drop that. In June, we started the project and we saw the uprising happening there. We completely dropped it. In Myanmar, the kind of work that these small grassroots organizations they're dealing with. Like I said, some of them are not allowed to go to some of the areas. Some of them we are not allowed to tell their names. They require permits to travel to some parts of the country. Very much happening even here in India, even in Sri Lanka. Of course, a lot of them have been affected, but somehow because they don't worry so much about, they need to capture X number of geographies, they are focusing on their communities and the landscapes that they are associated with. That somewhere helps them to, continue the work that they're doing. But it has its pros and cons, of course. Funds is a massive challenge. Like even in Myanmar, they're not able to raise funds. They need someone like a WWF to raise funds for them, then sub-grant them. So of course there are, it just goes without saying that there are massive challenges. Some tweaks are being made by organizations, but it comes down to, how much is the organization able to actually endure and kind of move around the system.
I just want to just quickly also add, like they are also extremely resilient and very adaptive because they work on the ground, right? Where everything is real there, like people, position, power, politics, culture, everything is real. So their adaptive and resilience capacity is quite tremendously high. So in terms of the geopolitical tension, of course it has, but I think like the window of the geopolitical tension to be experienced at the grassroots level might be short, but their ongoing struggle is already so huge. Like everyday operations, everyday trouble that they have on land rights, like, people's cattle entering into the protected area, non-protected area, all that kind of thing for them, like it feels fairly reasonable that these geopolitical tensions are happening in a sense, like, but their ongoing everyday struggle amount to quite larger thing comparatively.
Thank you.
Yeah, just like to add one thing. I just saw someone was asking what does success look like. What Swapnil mentioned that, just cattle not going into a restored area is success for them. And that's how evidence and success needs to be measured for grassroots organization. That itself is huge for them.
Great.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm sorry, I hate to break up a great chat. I'm sure we could actually stay on here all day, but I'm aware that we've already taken up more of your time than we had allocated. I want to say a huge thank you to Radhika and Swapnil for such an amazing project, which has such broad impact. And I'm so excited from the chat to see all the connections being made and all the collaborations that have already happened as a result of this project. So I can't wait to see it continue. So huge thank you to you both. It's always really sad when these things end, but I feel like this one will continue to flourish and have impact wider than the original project. So thank you to you. Thank you to everyone who's come and brought all this energy. It's so lovely to see all your faces. I am recording this, and after the seminar, I will share it both with the participants and with the wider network. Please do reach out to Radhika and Swapnil if you'd like to collaborate and find out more about the tool, and you can do that via the emails they've dropped into the chat or via me if you need anything. I think Swap was keen to get a screenshot.
Oh,
right?
we need to take the screenshot. Madhu had just come online, he was hiding behind the wall.
There you
Now
go.
he's
So
we need to take a screenshot,
if anyone who is comfortable wants to put their cameras on for this, we'd appreciate it. And then we'll give you all back your day. Thank you so much, everybody.